I am his lawyer, the judge laughed. Until the little black girl proved to be a genius in court. Your Honor, I object to this procedure. The voice cut through the murmur of the courtroom like a sharp blade. All eyes turned in unison, incredulous. The room was packed that Tuesday morning in Chicago, lawyers adjusting expensive ties, handcuffed defendants awaiting sentencing, families crying quietly in the galleries. But the voice did not come from any seasoned lawyer. It came from a little black girl of only 10 standing in the front row, her braids adorned with colorful beads swaying slightly, her chin up, her brown eyes burning with a determination that did not match her age. Judge Rebecca Morrison, a 52-year-old white woman hardened by 3 decades on the bench, paused with her pen in the air and looked over her reading glasses. Her face contorted into a condescending smile that everyone in the room recognized, the smile of someone about to swat an annoying fly. Sit down, child. This is no place for games. I'm not playing games, Your Honor. The girl took a step forward, holding a worn cardboard folder to her chest like a shield. Her voice was clear, without stuttering, impressive for someone so small. My name is Zoe Williams. I am 10 years old. And I am the defense attorney for my father, Jamal Al-Farouk. The courtroom erupted in laughter. Not discreet chuckles, but loud, mocking guffaws. The prosecutor, a man in an impeccable gray suit named Richard Brennan, leaned back in his chair with a smug smile. Even the appointed defense attorney, a sloppy man named Martin Hayes, seemed more interested in checking his phone than in the life of the client he was supposed to be representing. The judge banged her gavel once, but still smiled with cruel condescension. Miss Williams, I appreciate your creativity. But courts have rules. Now sit down before I call security. Zoe didn't move. Her heart was beating so hard she could hear it in her ears, but her voice came out steady. With all due respect, Your Honor, under the Sixth Amendment, my father is entitled to competent legal representation. Mr. Hayes has spent exactly 12 minutes with him since his arrest 4 days ago. That constitutes negligence under the precedent set in Strickland v. Washington. The judge's smile vanished like mist in bright sunlight. The silence that followed was so thick it seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. Some spectators took out their cell phones to record. A 10-year-old child citing case law was not something you saw every day. Jamal Al-Farouk, sitting at the defense table in an orange prison uniform, looked at his adopted daughter with wide eyes shining with tears. He was 45 years old, with gray hair at the temples, his Middle Eastern accent still evident even after 20 years in the United States. A janitor at the prestigious law firm Hartman & Associates for 18 years, he had been arrested the previous Friday at 4:37 p.m., accused of stealing $200,000 in corporate checks. But he hadn't stolen anything. And Zoe knew it. This is absurd, Prosecutor Brennan stood up, his voice laden with performative indignation. This child is turning a courtroom into a circus. This child, Zoe turned to him with sparkling eyes that seemed much older than her 10 years, has spent the last 3 years studying every law book she could find in the library at my father's office. And I can cite more case law in 10 minutes than Mr. Hayes has cited in his entire mediocre career. Attorney Hayes finally looked up, his face red with anger and shame. Judge Morrison leaned forward, and for the first time there was something different in her eyes, no longer condescension, but dangerous curiosity mixed with irritation. Miss Williams, do you have any idea what you're doing? Yes, Your Honor. I'm saving my father from an unjust conviction based on prejudice and lies. And then Zoe opened her worn briefcase and pulled out the first document, a sheet of plain paper, but with words that would change everything. And I also have evidence that someone in this court does not want the truth to come out. Prosecutor Brennan instantly turned pale. The judge sat up straight in her chair. Jamal Al-Farouk gripped the edge of the table so tightly that his fingers turned white. What no one in that room knew, not the judge, not the prosecutor, not the spectators streaming live on their cell phones, was that a 10-year-old black girl was about to dismantle a conspiracy that went far beyond stolen checks. A conspiracy that involved powerful names, dirty secrets, and a system that bet that a child defending an Arab immigrant would be easy to ignore. They bet wrong. If you've ever witnessed injustice and felt powerless to act, then you know how Jamal felt at that moment, an honest man being destroyed by lies and prejudice. Be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what this 10-year-old girl did in the next few hours not only saved her adoptive father, but exposed a rot that no one wanted to admit existed. 4 days earlier, on Friday at 4:37 p.m., Jamal Al-Farouk's life had fallen apart in a matter of minutes. He was cleaning the hallway on the 10th floor of the Hartman and Associates office when 3 police officers entered with an arrest warrant. Jamal Al-Farouk, you are under arrest for grand theft and corporate fraud. The handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists in front of dozens of lawyers and secretaries. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others watched with thinly veiled satisfaction. A man in an expensive suit, Douglas Hartman Jr., son of the firm's founder, stood in the doorway of his office with his arms crossed and a cold smile. "I didn't do anything," Jamal repeated in heavily accented English. "Please, there's been a mistake." No one heard him. The news reached Zoe through a call from Mrs. Chun, the kind secretary who always let Jamal bring his daughter to study in the office library after hours. "Zoe, dear, something has happened. Your father has been arrested. You need to be strong." Zoe was only 10 years old, but she had already learned to be strong. She had to be. Jamal had adopted her from the foster care system 3 years earlier, when she was 7 and no one else wanted her, a little black girl labeled problematic for asking too many questions and trusting too little. Jamal saw in her not a problem, but a brilliant mind hungry for knowledge. For 3 years, while he cleaned offices at night, Zoe hid in the law library devouring books. It started with curiosity. She wanted to understand the system that had separated her from her birth mother. Soon it became an obsession. Cases, precedents, procedures, she absorbed it all like a sponge. Now, all that knowledge had a purpose. On Saturday morning, Zoe visited Jamal in prison. Through the dirty glass, he tried to smile so as not to scare her. "Habibi, my dear, everything will be fine. It's just a misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding, Daddy. It's a setup." Zoe put her hand against the glass. "Tell me everything. Every detail." Jamal explained. On Thursday during the day, Douglas Hartman Jr. had called him into his office and asked him to sign a restricted area clearance confirmation form. Jamal signed it without reading it thoroughly. He trusted the lawyers. That Thursday night, he worked as usual and left at 9:03 p.m., as always. He clocked out, filled up his car at the corner gas station, and picked up Zoe from the babysitter's house at 9:25 p.m. On Friday, he returned to work as usual. At 4:37 p.m., he was arrested. The charge, $200,000 in corporate checks, disappeared on Friday night at 11:15 p.m. The security cameras mysteriously failed. Jamal's access card was used in the file room at exactly that time. But how? Jamal was desperate. On Friday at 11:15 p.m., I had already been in jail for 7 hours. How could I have stolen something while I was in a cell? Zoe wrote everything down in her notebook, her eyes shining with sudden understanding. "Dad, you signed something on Thursday that they're going to use against you. And your card was cloned. Someone committed the crime after you were already in jail, knowing you couldn't defend yourself." Over the next few days, Zoe worked like a 10-year-old detective. She called Mrs. Chun, who confirmed that she had seen Jamal leave on Thursday around 9 p.m. She got a copy of the electronic time clock record from a sympathetic employee. It showed Jamal leaving at 9:03 p.m. on Thursday. She went to the gas station on the corner and asked for the security camera footage from 9:18 p.m. on Thursday. There was Jamal, filling up his car, timestamp visible. He researched Douglas Hartman Jr. and discovered that the office was losing clients and facing lawsuits for misconduct. And then he found the key piece, a newspaper article from 2 months earlier. Hartman office under federal investigation for money laundering. Partner Douglas Hartman Jr. denies involvement. It all made sense. Douglas wasn't just framing Jamal, he was using an immigrant janitor as a scapegoat for his own crimes. He arrested Jamal before the robbery took place, ensuring that he would have no alibi for the time of the crime at 11:15 p.m. On Monday, when public defender Martin Hayes finally visited Jamal for a hurried 12 minutes, he didn't even ask about an alibi or evidence. "Look, you'd be best off taking a deal. With your immigration history and the evidence against you." "What history?" Jamal interrupted. "I've been here legally for 20 years. I've never committed a crime." Hayes shrugged. "The prosecutor has your access card used at 11:15 p.m., has your signature on documents, has opportunity. A jury isn't going to believe you over a respected American lawyer." That night, Zoe made her decision. If the system wouldn't give her father justice, she would fight for the system. She spent the entire night organizing her brief, evidence, timeline, witness list, legal precedents scribbled in her childish but precise handwriting. What no one knew, not Douglas Hartman Jr. counting his stolen money, not Prosecutor Brennan preparing his easy case, not Judge Morrison waiting for another routine hearing, was that a 10-year-old girl was about to turn the tables completely, armed only with truth, intelligence, and courage that grown men lacked. Judge Morrison adjusted her glasses, looking at Zoe with a mixture of irritation and reluctant curiosity. "Very well, Miss Williams. You have exactly 5 minutes to justify this interruption. Otherwise, you will be removed and your father will proceed with the representation he has." Zoe took a deep breath. 5 minutes to save a life. "Your Honor, the prosecution's case rests on 3 pillars. My father's access card used at 11:15 p.m. on Friday, his signature on a document, and lack of an alibi. I can dismantle all 3 and prove this is a calculated conspiracy." Prosecutor Brennan stood up with a condescending smile. "With all due respect, this is childish fantasy." "Sit down, Mr. Brennan," the judge ordered curtly. She looked at Zoe. "Continue." Zoe opened her briefcase and held up a printed sheet. "First, my father was arrested on Friday at 4:37 p.m. The prosecution claims he used his card to steal checks at 11:15 p.m. that same night. How could he have committed a crime at 11:15 p.m. when he had been locked in a cell for 7 hours? The silence that followed was absolute. Brennan visibly paled. Some spectators in the gallery whispered in disbelief. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Brennan, explain this." The timeline. We need to check the custody records." "The records are right here." Zoe held up another document. Jamal Al-Farouk was booked at 5:22 p.m. on Friday. He was in police custody at 11:15 p.m. That's not just evidence of innocence. It's proof that whoever committed the crime knew my father would be locked up and unable to defend himself. The room erupted in murmurs. Reporters began typing frantically. The judge banged her gavel repeatedly. "But there's more," Zoe continued, her voice gaining strength. "The prosecution says my father has no alibi. That's a lie. On Thursday night, he left work at 9:03 p.m. Here is the electronic time clock record. At 9:18 p.m., he was filling up our car. Here is the frame from the gas station camera with a visible timestamp. At 9:25 p.m., he picked me up from the babysitter's house, Mrs. Rodriguez, who confirms this in writing." Brennan tried to recover. "Electronic records can be altered." "Then explain the photo from the independent gas station," Zoe cut him off. "Explain the testimony of Mrs. Chun, executive secretary at Hartman's own office, who saw my father leave on Thursday. Explain how all this evidence lines up perfectly." The judge took the documents, examining each one with increasing severity. "Continue, Miss Williams." "Second, the document my father signed. The prosecution says he authorized access to restricted areas. But look at the date, Thursday, March 14th. The crime was Friday, March 15th, at 11:15 p.m. He signed 26 hours before. And he was arrested 7 hours before. How does that prove guilt?" Zoe gave him no chance to respond. "Third, the access card used at 11:15 p.m. The Hartman office system uses programmable RFID cards. Anyone with administrative access can clone cards. And do you know who has full administrative access?" She turned and pointed directly at a man in the gallery, Douglas Hartman Jr. Douglas Hartman Jr. accessed the card programming module on Thursday at 5:45 p.m., exactly 15 minutes after my father signed that document. Here is the system log. Douglas turned white as a sheet. Several people turned to look at him. He tried to get up and leave, but an officer blocked the door. "Objection!" Brennan shouted desperately. "That's baseless speculation." "Speculation." Zoe held up another document. Douglas also accessed the security camera server at 11:10 p.m. on Friday, 5 minutes before the theft. The cameras were remotely disabled from his IP address. And there's more. She pulled out a newspaper article printout. The Hartman office is under federal investigation for money laundering. $200,000 is missing, exactly the amount Douglas needs to cover financial shortfalls before next week's federal audit. He wasn't just stealing, he was creating a perfect scapegoat. An Arab immigrant janitor arrested before the crime took place, with no means to defend himself. The room erupted in exclamations. The judge banged her gavel furiously. Mr. Hartman, approach the witness stand immediately. Douglas didn't move, his hands shaking visibly. Now, or you will be removed by force. As Douglas slowly walked forward, Zoe turned to Jamal. Her father was crying openly, smiling through his tears. She blinked back her own tears. The truth was finally coming to light. Douglas Hartman Jr. climbed onto the witness stand with steps that seemed to weigh a ton. His $3,000 suit could no longer hide the sweat dripping from his temples. Judge Morrison watched him with eyes that had seen 1,000 liars, but rarely with such contempt. Mr. Hartman, you are under oath. Explain why you accessed the RFID card programming system exactly 15 minutes after the defendant signed that document. Douglas opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes scanned the room, Prosecutor Brennan avoiding his gaze, reporters recording every second, Zoe watching him with the devastating calm of someone who already knows she has won. I needed to check maintenance routines. Lie, Zoe said simply. The system log shows that you specifically cloned my father's card. Not any other employees. And you also accessed the camera server at 11:10 p.m., 5 minutes before the theft. The cameras were remotely disabled from your IP address. Douglas tried to stand up, but the judge stopped him with a gesture. Sit down. We're not done. Your Honor, Zoe continued, Douglas Hartman Jr. didn't just clone the card and disable cameras. He carefully planned to frame my father before the crime took place. At 4:37 p.m. on Friday, he called the police with fabricated evidence. 7 hours later, at 11:15 p.m., he committed the robbery using the cloned card, knowing my father would be in a cell with no way to defend himself. The room fell silent. And why? Zoe held up the newspaper article again. Because the federal investigation would uncover the $200,000 deficit in next week's audit. He needed someone to blame. And he chose an immigrant janitor that the system would discard without a second thought. Judge Morrison stood up, and the entire room felt the weight of her authority. Jamal Al-Farouk, stand up. Jamal stood up, trembling, still handcuffed. The charges against you are dropped immediately. All of them. You are free. She gestured to the officer. Remove those handcuffs now. The sound of metal opening echoed through the room like music. Jamal rubbed his wrists, looking around as if he couldn't believe it. The judge wasn't finished. Douglas Hartman Jr., you're charged with obstruction of justice, fabrication of evidence, corporate fraud, system intrusion, and framing an innocent man. Officers, take him into custody. The same man who had watched Jamal get arrested 4 days earlier was now handcuffed in front of the entire courtroom. His face was red with shame and impotent rage. Mr. Brennan, the judge continued, her voice sharp, I strongly recommend that your office review all cases involving the Hartman office. How many other innocent people have you helped destroy through laziness and prejudice? Brennan simply lowered his head, offering no response. Then the judge looked at Zoe. Her stern face softened only slightly. Miss Williams, what you did today was extraordinary. Technically illegal, yes, children cannot represent anyone in court. But you exposed an injustice that this system almost allowed to happen. Zoe finally felt the tears she had been holding back for 4 days stream down her face. I just did what was right, Your Honor. Because if I didn't fight for him, no one would. Jamal didn't wait for permission. He rushed to the railing separating the gallery and hugged his 10-year-old daughter with desperate force, sobbing words in Arabic mixed with English. My girl, my hero, you saved me. You saved me. The entire room, lawyers, journalists, spectators, rose to their feet in applause. Not polite courtroom applause, but a thunderous standing ovation that made the judge give up on banging her gavel. 6 months later, Jamal was no longer working as a janitor, but as a facilities supervisor in the same building, hired by a different law firm that valued integrity. Zoe was in a special program for gifted children, studying with mentors who finally recognized her talent. Douglas Hartman Jr. was serving an 8-year sentence. Hartman and Associates closed its doors after a federal investigation uncovered years of corruption. Prosecutor Brennan was transferred to administrative duties after a disciplinary review. And Zoe? She continued to study law. No longer hiding in libraries after hours, but openly with pride. When asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, she answered without hesitation, a defense attorney. For people the system forgets. Because she had learned the most important lesson, justice doesn't happen on its own. It needs to be fought for, defended, protected, sometimes by a 10-year-old girl with a cardboard folder and more courage than any courtroom. True strength is not in power or money. It is in standing up when everyone tells you to sit down, in speaking when everyone tells you to be quiet, in fighting when it would be easier to give up. Zoe proved that age, size, or background don't matter when you have truth on your side and love in your heart. If this story of courage and justice has touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories proving that the most unlikely heroes often change the world. Not with force, but with intelligence, not with privilege, but with purpose. Because sometimes, justice wears beaded braids and is only 10 years old.